My game focuses around a simple yet strong concept. This concept is colour matching. The player must become the colour of the object that they want to interact with. The player can do this by collecting small cubes which have their own colour, and once collected will become part of the player. The player can now use this cube to its advantage, utilising its colour in order to move on these platforms or press buttons, or even fire out the cube as a projectile in order to hit or press buttons it could not reach. The player can stack up to 5 cubes. This allows the player to plan their moves ahead of time in order to progress through the tougher, more complex levels. The player can also drop these cubes, allowing them to rearrange or save certain cubes for later. Dropped cubes can also help the player by pausing a platform at its current position. The game went through many different iterations, using the player's mass to progress through the levels in a similar way to the colour is in the final product. This was shown to be boring and unintuitive for players, and this is where the colours came in. In order to show the player what they could and could not interact with and what they were doing wrong, I implemented the colour system. Testing was a huge part of the development process. This is what led to many of the changes the game faced over the development period. Seeing the change in response from the initial design to the eventual colour-popping protagonist, I knew I was onto something. The game's strengths come from its sound and simple core concept, with it being intuitive, with a high ceiling of variety and challenge. A unique 3D platformer with a fun and satisfying gameplay experience, lending itself to a calm and interesting and brain teaser style of gameplay. The prototype's weakness stems from the shallowness of the prototype. The level design is lacking in compared to the potential of the mechanic. I believe it does a good enough job to show off the basics, but could definitely be expanded upon. The lack of variety in the interactions, with only platforms and buttons for the player to interact with, the core mechanics fall short of its true variety. The last weakness comes from the platformer style movement. This prototype doesn't really lend itself to the movement that I currently have implemented. It's a little janky and not as smooth as I would like it to be for this prototype. With more testing and time, I would like to smoothen out the player movement as well as the camera and general view of the puzzle platforming level. I would prefer for the player to be able to see his obstacles more easily rather than just in the opening scroll. A potential fix for this would be a change in perspective for the player. The puzzle platforming cube aspect of the game really lends itself to an orthographic view where the player can see the world in front of him more clearly and surpass these obstacles with more thought rather than instinct. The addition of a planned enemy could also allow for a more varied experience. With these plans of an enemy who would impact the player by randomizing their colour or destroying/replacing a colour could really impact the player in a fun and interesting way that would make the player have to rethink their moves. Better and more complex level design that poses more of a challenge as well as an open pathway to completing the level, allowing more than just one linear route to completion.